Hi, Imran. How is
Hey,
it?
Nana. Yeah, good man. How you doing, buddy? You well?
Yeah, I'm good. So
Awesome.
you're the
Awesome.
first guest that've been two times on the podcast.
Oh my goodness, I feel honored. Should I be honored? I feel honored being on the first time, let alone second time. Although I think our first podcast was a bit longer than planned, wasn't it?
Yeah, but we had so much fun, and after that, we've done several videos that people can watch. But if they don't know who you are, can you just do like a small recap?
Yeah, cool. So hey everyone, and great to be here again with you, Nana. Bit of background on me. Used to work in corporate life. Got made redundant about 11 or so years ago, and went into the world of property. But I've been very lucky that I sat in planning committees through local authorities for many years, for over a decade, and learned a lot about how local authorities work from the inside out. So seeing it from the planning side rather than the developer side. But being very lucky to sort of invest in development projects and mentor and coach people from all over the world, which has been a real pleasure and honor. So hope that gives you a bit of an insight. Lastly,
Yeah,
just two beautiful kids, cheeky wife that keeps me in check. And that's probably me and you, Nana, as well.
yeah. That's Imran. And if you want to listen to the whole episode where he go through his whole life with Boris, Theresa May, all of these, because he's been with some big timers hitters in UK. You can listen to that episode, Imran. Yeah. So today, actually, why you're on second time is because you have so much knowledge about planning. So we're gonna pick your brain, or I'm gonna pick your brain about planning. So what is planning for people that's not aware of planning? Can you tell
Yeah,
them?
yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, and obviously, just for everyone listening, and obviously, I'm not a planning consultant. I'm just very lucky that I spent all that time, working with planning officers and voting through, or small extensions to voting through where we build, the next 100,000 homes in a part of the UK. So it's a fascinating experience. But in terms of what is planning, planning itself is that when you go into the UK property market, if you're looking to do sort of internal refurbishments of the property, you don't necessarily require planning permission for that. However, if you just consider that anything that you're going to do external, so if you're going to do an extension on a property or you're going to build something new, you're going to need to go to a local authority, so like a district or borough council or unitary council, and you're going to need to apply for a form of planning permission, because you can't just go and build it. It needs to comply with certain regulations. I know, Nana, in Sweden, your properties are very different to how they are in the UK. And, we've got some pretty old properties here, that
Yes.
obviously if you're going to build onto them, you've got to, do them with the right care. So planning is a process, is an application process of getting something through so you can do something. You can't go ahead and just build what you want.
Are you sure?
Well, I know some people that have, but the ramifications, we'll probably talk about that today. I know people that have done something, but that can lead to lots of issues and could cost you a lot of money to try and fix it.
Okay. So how does it work with planning? How do you go about it?
Well, I guess it all comes down to, you talked about this on past podcasts, it's about having the right team around you depending on your deal. So let's say, for example, I'm looking to buy a property, but the property has a large piece of land to the left of that site. And then I think to myself, well, I could potentially go in and build one or two new houses, dwellings is another term, but maybe new houses, maybe mirroring what was there right now. So if there's an existing detached house, maybe I could build two more in the land that's there. So I need to have, before I even go to planning, I need to make sure I've got an architect to help draw up some outline plans and ideas. And one thing you can do is you can, go to a local council. People, I think, are scared about going to councils and talking to planning officers. They almost feel like they need to keep all the information close to them rather than letting it out. When actually, it's important to share with a planning officer what you're wanting to do. So what you can do is you can go and have a conversation with a planning officer at a council. They will charge for it. They used to do it for free, but sadly, government spending obviously got cut, so the councils have to make money now, and planning is one of their biggest income streams. as I would know. And so what they do is that you go and apply for having an outline meeting. You take with you some drawings of what you potentially think could be viable in that scheme of things. So you'd have an architect. So before you even go to planning, you'd have an architect. You probably will also maybe have at this stage a planning consultant, maybe someone that can also advise you on the planning legislation for that area, because planning varies across the country. So if you're in the north of the UK, the planning rules for that area might vary slightly to the south of the UK. And I think that's something that you have to bear in mind. So an architect and planning consultant are crucial, and just start to get a guide for what is likely to get through, because if you spend all this money going, getting formal plans drawn up, submitting a massive application to the local council, and then 8, 9, 10 weeks later, just finding you get refused, you've wasted that money. This sort of first informal meeting, which is a private meeting, is not public. So the information is not shared on public websites. So you can then talk about your outline plans in confidence, and then get the guide and gauge of where the planning officer at that point is at, what they like, what they don't like, whether they're going to say to you, look, we would never entertain anything on this land. You'll get that guide up front, and it's worth spending that few £100s rather than spending thousands of pounds, and getting rejected.
Yeah. Okay. So what cost can you expect when seeking planning?
Oh, crikey, what cost can you expect? So you've got to remember, I'm a great believer in some respects, you get what you pay for. And look, you could go to, I remember one site, you can go to architects and get various quotes from local architects. And those quotes can really vary dramatically. You could have one architect that would say, right, we're going to draw up detailed designs and drawings. So this is for a full application, by the way, so a full detailed planning application. So they're going to draw up elevations, probably some pastel drawings about what the landscape will look like, what the site will look like. So you're probably going to spend, anything from £5,000 to possibly £10,000 on average in terms of getting planning. On some areas, you might spend more than that. So if you've got a slightly more bespoke scheme, you could end up spending something like £15,000, £20,000, because you're also going to bring in external consultants through your architectural contact to do landscape designs and highways assessments. So you could spend quite a bit of money. So you've got to be pretty confident you're going to get something through.
Okay, so what's the length usually?
What's that question? Sorry. Oh, what's length? The length usually.
Yeah. When you seeking for planning.
So it depends what type of application you're going for. So let's say, for example, you're going for something which is an outline application. So you're going for something which doesn't necessarily give you permission to build, but you're seeking clarity over the likelihood. So an outline is more it is a form of permission, but it means that the council like the idea of you building something in that space. But you then need to go to the full stage of a full application. So an outline, you could have that through within 4 or 5 weeks, potentially, depending on the scheme. Whereas a full detailed application, it's likely that you're going to be looking at a minimum of 8 weeks to get something through. Normally it's 8 with a maximum of 13 weeks, because the council, depending on the local authority, they have to determine an application within a certain time frame. So 8 to 13 weeks is what you'll tend to look at from a planning application in standard terms. Of course, I'm going to use the word COVID because they're still in that space at the moment, but it can take that a bit longer because planning officers are still working from home in some councils. So you do have to bear in mind that you're relying on bodies. And the reason it takes that time, and by the way, this is the time when you submit the application. So this isn't even when you're doing the legwork behind the scenes, the architect drawings, it's just from when you submit it, is what will happen. The planning officer will also need to go out to external consultants. So they might say, right, we need to go out and get feedback from the local environment agency. We need feedback from the highways authority in terms of that new road that you want to build and get 100 cars driving up that road. Is the road capable of doing so? Do you need to put any improvements in? So there's a lot of other key parties, and that's why that process can be delayed. Plus they have to have a consultation period for the local public and neighbours to either say they love your plan or they hate your plan, or somewhere in between.
And so you mentioned the short one that took like 5-6 weeks. What's the difference between that one and permitted development? And if you could tell the listeners what permitted development is as well.
Yeah, so let's just take an outline application. So an outline application is a much more affordable scenario of finding out what the likelihood of planning is. So rather than maybe have an informal meeting to begin with, you may decide, hey, I'm going to get the architect to draw up a very basic outline plan of a site with an outline idea of where maybe some new houses or a block of apartments could go. You can submit that to the local authority, and that would go through the normal consultation route. So neighbours will be contacted and give their feedback. So the council will then go through the normal planning process of reviewing the application and seeking, would they, if this was a full application, would they support the outlined concept of it? So it's the conceptual scheme. So at the end of that process, you'll either get an approval, and that basically means that if you then come forward with a more detailed application, you've got much more likelihood of it getting passed. There's still the detail to review, but the likelihood is much, much stronger. The great thing about that is also that you've added value. This is one thing that people forget. An outline application actually adds value, and it could be something that you could sell as an investor. So if you own the land, you've got outline planning, you could sell that onto a larger developer for them to go and develop because they've got some more confidence that the likelihood is possible. So that's an outline. Permitted development is a great thing. We've seen so many planning changes since especially last year and last autumn, where you can undertake certain works on a property without needing planning permission. So you can convert loft space, you can extend to the rear of a property without needing formal planning. You still need to submit some paperwork to the council, but in some areas you can extend 3-6 meters on a single story level to the rear of a property. And if you've got like a HMO where you're renting out rooms and you need more living space because the HMO officer wants you to comply with regulations, so you can sort of extend to the rear, know that's going to go through anyway, and not lose any bedrooms potentially, or if you're doing a flip like the one I was talking to you about in London the other week, you could extend to the rear there, and I know that I can get that through without needing to go through the planning and basically taking away some of the risk, which is great.
Yeah. Okay, that was a really good explanation. So what happens if you change something without notifying planning or attending planning?
What happens if you change something without notifying planning? So when I was on the planning committees, we actually saw a number of these. And I think back, I'm going to do it from if I was on a planning committee now.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about it from a council's point of view. And there are sort of a number of ways which things are decided on. So if it's sort of a minor change, it may be that a planning officer will then need to, so let's say, for example, let's go back one step. So let's say Nana, I'm going to say your company, Miracle Properties, goes and buys a house, and you decide to do a sort of 2-story side extension to that house, okay, and make it a bigger monster HMO, make loads of cash flow, and which is amazing. Then you get an enforcement notice from the planning department, which states that you've breached planning because you've built something which doesn't have it. So in theory, what could happen? You've got a few options. You can then apply retrospectively to the council. So you could apply for planning, and as you would normally, as if you hadn't built it, and then the planning department need to then assess the scheme and say, okay, if this wasn't here, would we have let this happen? So if that scheme wasn't there, would they have given you planning permission for that? So that's the first test. It's got to pass. If it passes that, then the potential is that you might get planning for it, but there's going to be some fixing potentially to do, because we have no idea if you've got building regulations for it in terms of the sort of structural side of it. So there's other issues that are going to be unearthed. So that's one aspect. A council could come back and say, we don't like it, knock it down, get rid of it. That's an expensive cost. So that can get legal. Legals can get involved there. You obviously could appeal, but there are some risks there when doing that. The other aspect is where maybe the planning officer would normally decide internally what they want to do. However, if local neighbours speak to their local councillor or politician in the area, they may call that application to go to a formal planning committee. Now, that's the sort of thing that I sat on. I sat on planning committees. Now, planning committees, when they see the application, they'll see the word retrospective. They don't like that. They do not like retrospective, because straight away they know someone has breached something and they go, hey, that's not good enough. It's on our area. So naturally you're on the back foot already. And that's where you then need to spend more time and money getting planning consultants, architects, yourself, you there, you may go to that meeting, that public meeting. Neighboring residents might go and speak against your application. So you're in a public forum now where you've got 5 minutes to sort of tell that committee why your scheme should be approved. Okay, you then also got people who are speaking against the application that also have 5 minutes, and they will be saying to the committee why it should be refused. So the risk is if the committee side with the residents, and emotionally get involved, they're still got to have planning reasons. But if emotion takes over and they side with them, that's risky. So yeah, I would say be careful. Having said that, one thing I will say is in some councils, and in planning law as well, if you've done something to a property and the local authority hasn't noticed that for a number of years, and it can vary from council to council and legislation, then there is the potential that you could get it through without needing, you still need to apply potentially, but you could get it through under what we call certificate of lawful use. So it means that it's been in place for a number of years, so the council will recognise it as existing. But I would still suggest you need to put in some sort of legal documentation with the council, because if you want to sell that building in the future, there's going to be a planning check done, and if there's no documentation for it, there's going to cause issues for you getting out that deal at the back end.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so how long does planning hold before you need to extend it?
Once you've got permission, you mean? So if you've got permission on something. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use your example of your awesome HMO. So let's say, for example, you've got permission to do a 2-story extension, and that permission is granted in March, 2021. So normally, in the conditions of the application, you'll normally have somewhere around 3 years to commence the work, and that could be digging the footings and the foundations out and starting to do the external shell. The moment you've at least started works, that permission is now in place. So let's say, for example, you sit on that planning permission for 2.5 years, and then you start doing the work after 2.5 years, and you just build the shell. You don't do any internal works to begin with, you just build the shell. Now, in that respect, that's fine. You have permission, you've done what you need to. But if you get to the 3 years and you haven't done anything, then sadly, you'll just have to resubmit a new application. It could be the same application, but you'll have to then spend some more money submitting the same application again, and then getting approved, hopefully, and then carry on doing the work. So 3 years is a normal term.
Okay. And if, let's say, if they say no, can you appeal?
Okay, so if well, in any scheme, so if, for example, a planning application is refused by a local authority, and I think back to the site that we acquired, which was the 19-unit conversion deal that we're doing. So that one went through a whole process where it was refused, had to go to appeal, and then got approved at appeal. So you can appeal to what we call the planning inspectorate. They're based, I think they're still based out of Bristol, and that's an independent inspectorate. And what will happen is an inspector will come and be allocated to your planning application, and they will come and assess the site. At that point, you will need to put a robust argument of why your application should be approved, and the local council, the local authority, will also do the same. They'll put their viewpoint about why it should still be refused, even though it's been refused before. They'll put more weight on the bone, more meat on the bone, to try and keep that refusal in place. So it is a risky thing to consider. However, if you believe, in your planning consultant you're working with believe you've got a strong case, you can always go down a planning inspectorate route. So you can appeal, is the answer. So
this can take like several years, it sounds like.
I think it depends on the scale of the development. I think if it's a sort of smaller one, then you could find within a few months you've got a site visit by the planning inspector, and then a decision pretty quickly after that process of that site visit. However, if it's a larger scale development, it can drag on, you're right. If you're talking multi units, multi-million-pound development, then yes, the whole process can drag on potentially. If you're looking at, 100, 200, 300 units, you might have inspectors coming to assess overall plans and schemes, and that can take a long time. But other sites, a few months, you'd have it hopefully done, and you just have to say, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And it might be worth the pain of going through the process.
Yeah. And let's say if you you doesn't agree with the council, will it just drag on back and forth to either one of you like say yes or just leave it?
So if so let's say for
Or is
example,
it another level that maybe you can go after? Let's say if you're arguing with them back and forth, is there another level higher
hmm,
below above them, or that's the
do you mean like, for example, when let's say you've gone to appeal with the planning inspector, and let's say the
yeah
inspector's still gone with the local council, so they've said no, we're still refusing it.
yeah?
Really, you're sort of
Is
at
there
that
another
point
one
there. You
above
could go
them?
to yeah, you could go to you could sort of try and go to high court and judicial side of it, but that's
Oh
going to be
wow,
one really expensive.
yeah
And I think on the grand scheme of things with some of the smaller sites, it's not worth doing. Not worth
no
doing.
okay
What you should maybe do then, if you get to that stage, you may decide rather than actually going to appeal, if you've got refused, is it worth going to appeal, or is it worth going back to the drawing board, sitting down with a planning officer who refused your scheme and sitting down with them and saying, okay, you refused it. Let's talk through the things that you didn't like. And let's work
yeah
out what can we come back with. So then come back with something like new, a fresh application, which maybe you've tried to mitigate most of the concerns that were there before, or maybe you
yeah
mitigate 70% of them, and those other 30% are factors that the officer feels, okay, the applicant, you and I, the applicants, the developers, we've done the best we can, to get through this, and hopefully they'll support a second scheme.
okay yeah, that was good answer, and it was a bad question for me. I couldn't take it out from my mind.
No. I hope I answered it all right. I do my best to. So it's
Yeah. So, what type of survey should one do on a conversion, and what type of survey must you do to get planning approved on a conversion? So that's like a
so
two question in one.
yeah. So on conversion, so you need to so on conversions, you need to do much more detailed site survey. So you need a structural survey on the building to be absolutely ascertained, because you've got to think about what you're doing to it. Because we've had changes under permitted development, changes to planning last year, so you can you can develop above existing property as well. You've got to make sure that structure can contain that. So there might be boreholes being dug, into the ground. So you're going to have structural surveys done. You're going to have ground investigation work done to make sure that the ground is not what's the word I'm looking for? Contaminated, that the ground can take the load that is bearing on it. So that work needs to be done. I'd also say you need to consider about the what's under the ground in terms of drainage. So where are pipe works, where are drains, where's the gas, electricity, where's the electricity substation? That sounds crazy, right? But actually, if
Yeah.
you're going to build something like you're going to convert a commercial into multiple apartments, how are you going to get
Yeah.
electricity to site? How are you going to get gas to site? Where's that going to come in from? So all these things that we sort of sometimes forget about are really important. So
Yeah.
you do need to do a much more detailed survey. You need to get people with land experience, sort of literally digging boreholes and testing the site. And that's why some of these sites, it's a bit hard to, it's one thing to get planning. So it's all good. You can get planning permission, but what a planning permission doesn't do is it doesn't give you the answers to what's under the ground. Unless
Mm,
you've been able to secure that site on an option. Say you've secured the site on an option agreement where you have the rights to sort of access the land before you complete the purchase. You go
yeah.
and do your research beforehand. You get the boreholes dug so you understand what you're dealing with and if there's going to be any risk to you as a developer. And then you go for planning. But otherwise, you go in for planning, but you actually haven't dug those holes yet. So it's really hard. It's this whole chicken and egg scenario. So you might
Yeah.
need to put in more contingency in the buffet. So absolutely, land investigation, structural surveys on the build, site surveys. Where's electricity? Where's gas? To get a site. Where's water? Where's drainage? Where's sewage? Because we've got to get stuff off site as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned contingency. How much do you put in your contingency when you're doing like
Contingency.
when you?
It really varies, because a lot of the larger ones work on a fixed price contract. So they are deemed on a fixed price contract. And because of the way that larger development is structured, you normally get what we call a development loan from a lender.
Yeah.
So you've got a quantity surveyor that is coming to assess the build as it's being developed. So if you can imagine there are, let's say it's a 12-month project, and every month that QS is coming to see the site and make sure that works have been done up to date. So, so in effect, you're paying the builder up front, and then you're getting the money back from the development lender, because they're coming to assess the site, say, yes, it looks good. The builder has spent what they said they will spend, and then take the next step. So to come back to your question, contingency, I think it does depend on the site, but certain sites, I've known developers that have only worked at sort of a 5% contingency.
Oh, wow.
Price contracting. Of course, I would try and work a bit higher than that, sort of the 20% mark, especially on some of the conversions, because you just got to be safe. You've got to be careful. And that's contingency across the build. You might put contingencies in there across some of your professional fees, because again, there's going to be other aspects around, when you start digging out, things might appear. And so things might have to change. I was talking to the team last week on the conversion deal, and being that we lost time on the project because, of course, there was lockdown, and then so there was no build teams on site. They were talking about, right, we're going to have, originally they were looking like an 8-month delay on the build, which obviously frustrating, it's costly, but we've managed to the team have managed to save that down to 4 months of delay because of changing the type of steel frame construction we're going for. So some alterations in the plan mean we can make savings along the way. But of course, that's why you need to have, then there's going to be more cost on paying consultants to come in and do some more calculations in order to say, can we do a different structure that will then hopefully save us time? So overall, it makes sense to do that because the cost and benefit is worth it.
Okay. Yep. Oh, I lost. Are we there?
Got some questions for,
we did the survey, right?
Yeah, we did talk about survey. I think you talked about
this
one.
You
asked me about mistakes around developers and things like that.
Okay. So what are the most common mistakes new developers and investors do when applying for planning?
What are the common mistakes that new developers make when applying for planning? I tell you one thing that I think that developers forget about is actually really understanding what the community are going through from a build point of view. So just basing this on past experiences, say for example, you've found a piece of land that you want to develop in a quite a large town or a city, and if you had factored in what other planning applications had been granted or not granted in the last, say, 6 to 12 month period, you've got to remember you might be dealing with volatile feelings and emotions. So one thing that I think developers forget about is actually, if, say, for example, that large town has just had a major application come in for 2 sites, one for 200 homes, one for another 100 homes, and they've all got their picket fences saying, I don't want to support this, I'm angry. And then you come in, or we come in, let's say, and say we want to do a scheme for 20 homes. We might just tip them over the edge, from how people, honestly, it's so like this could happen. I think that developers forget, they sort of look at their site in isolation, but don't think about the bigger picture, don't think about the whole area. So I think that's really important when they're doing that. Contingency, I think sometimes they don't factor enough contingency into the build. I think a long time, I see this on sites where the GDV, so the end potential value, is always high, too high. So, if you're presented the site, say someone's sourcing us a site and an opportunity, it always looks very pretty on paper and very attractive, right? Because the numbers look so exciting. But when you start to drill in, you go, well, okay, you said the sole comparables are this, or these are we worth this much, but I'm not seeing anything selling at, that price per square foot or that price per square meter. So I'm then questioning, well, what is it? Are there gold taps in each, apartment, or what is it that's going to get these going? So I think sometimes the ambition of a high GDV can be really costly because, like you and I know, you make money in the buy, right? So if you're paying a premium for that land, thinking that you're going to get this awesome GDV, and then you're stuck, because your build cost is higher than you thought it was. I think that's the issue. Cheap as well on build. One last thing on that is where you get multiple contractors in to come and quote for the build. And and you just end up going with the cheapest price, which will you'll end up spending more money. No matter what, you'll end up spending more money. So those are sort of things that I sometimes hear about and felt as well ourselves. The last thing is also factoring in what is around the building. So often they say, right, it's going to cost this much to build 10 apartments. Great.
Yeah.
What about landscaping? What about the road up to the property? What about the car parking spaces? Oh, we didn't get a price for that. We thought that was included in the build. No. That might not be in the build. So it's important to factor that into the grand scheme of things.
Okay. And what about experienced investors?
About experienced investors, what might they miss?
Yeah. What mistakes do they do that you're seeing?
They shouldn't make mistakes, right?
Or all of them like perfect.
Oh, I'm sure they're not perfect. So it's a difficult, because I'm very lucky that I've met some of the big developers. You know, I had a goal a few years ago to meet. I've always wanted to meet a guy called Tony Pidgley. He's passed away sadly now, but he was the founder of Berkeley Homes. And I got to meet him a few years ago. Amazing guy, and obviously built that business from scratch years ago. But what do big developers do? Where are the mistakes there? I think sometimes with a big developer, it's more about who they choose to partner with at the early stage of the application process. So I've seen this where a big developer might partner with a PR firm that will need to go and build rapport in a community. But they might be shocking at doing it, and they might be shocking at building relationships with the planning officers. So if they're really bad at that, that doesn't make the developer look very good, because actually at the end of the day, they'll always look at the local community will look at the developer. They won't look at the PR company, because the PR company is representing them. And I've often seen that where you see these public events where a developer has hired a company to come and present plans, and the developer's there, but their PR company are running it. So I think they need to choose wisely. I do think that that's where a lot of mistakes are made. Where these PR companies have not moved with the times with social media and not leverage social media, because social media can be great for a developer, but also can be the total opposite. One negative comment can spiral conversations. So I think that's one of the biggies. It's more about, because their profit margins are higher, so because they build out far cheaper than you and I can, so their margins might be higher, but again, they do pay money back in. So one thing I think that maybe residents, from the other side see it is, they need to make lots of contributions towards schooling, infrastructure, and everything else, but they obviously can build out far cheaper than we can. But consultants, I think, is a big one for developers, using the right team.
So which people should one have involved from the start, make it easier to get planning approved?
Ooh,
I know you mentioned
so I would absolutely say an architect and planning consultant are gold dust. They're so important as part of any planning application process. And more importantly, if you're using an architect, asking them, have you worked with that local council? Have you been putting in applications over the last 5-10 years? What is your experience like? Because they will probably have a good relationship with them. I remember the authority I was with, I'm just talking very openly here. I remember when certain applications came forward, and even just talking to planning officers, if they knew who the consultant was or the planning officer, maybe I'm wrong, but I can sort of see a look in their faces of say, oh no, not that one again. Not that, not that developer again, not that person. So, you've got to make sure this person has the right rapport, because again, they're representing you, the applicant. So absolutely right architect's crucial. Absolutely right planning consultant. Again, someone that's had experience with that local authority, understands the local authority planning side of the business. To get it through. Those two people are so important. And I would say then, if you're not on the ground in country, say you're in Sweden, like you Nana, having someone to maybe build relationships with the community through the other local government models, and people that are active groups. So there's like what we call local town or parish council. So having someone that can have good conversations with them, that may be your architect, but they may not be the best party. There might be someone else that can come and present, so that the community feel that they're not being left out. I think that's important. So those three people along the way, and obviously bags of money as well, to go by. Well, let's say bags of money, but I think just, you don't necessarily have to have bags of money, but you need to have obviously some capital to get planning.
Yeah.
But you can be creative and secure the site in quite creative ways, as you and I know.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So what can you do to make it easier to get planning approved as an investor or a developer?
Um, I think sometimes we what's the term we use here? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So we sometimes decide that, hey, it'd be great if we can, we can design something how we want it. So let's say, for example, I came and visited you in Sweden and I saw this
Yeah.
stunning looking property. Then I came back to the UK and I came to Oxford and said, right, I've had that photo from Sweden, that selfie that you and I did in Sweden outside this nice property. And I want to plonk that in the high street in Oxford. Now, let alone the design of that is going to be a massive issue potentially.
Yes.
So I think the problem is that sometimes we try to overcomplicate design. We try and do things that we think are going to be amazing and stunning and fabulous inside and very unique. But sometimes that is just not what the planning officer wants to see there. So I do think that that's something you must be careful of. Also, your architect, it's also important to remind your architect of that as well, because architects can be very creative people. They're going to come up with some creative designs, and you need to remind them that, hey, is this design likely to get through the planning department? Because they might come up with some great designs and you might go, hey, the likelihood is this is not going to get through. So I do think it's important to bear that in mind. And one thing in past with one of my own learnings is using, when you get like CGI, like designs done and drawings done of what the site might look like once it's been developed, I think it's really important to try and use more pastel style designs, rather than harsh looking designs, because I think if a resident was looking at that, how they might feel about it will be very different. So soft looking designs I think are crucial. Does that give you some thoughts on that?
Yes, it does. It does. So what about grade 1 and 2? What is it, and why is it so sensitive?
Yeah, so grade 1 and 2. It's funny you bring this one up. There was literally, I think the other week, because I've been on the lookout for a commercial conversion or a project to convert into apartments, and I would love to do one. And there was one the other week where the numbers look great, and then they mentioned the word grade 1 or listing. So what it is basically where the local council have put almost a form of heritage rights over the building. So it means that not only when you go through planning permission is it going to be a damn sight harder, you're going to have to go through the listed buildings team at the local authority, because it basically means you cannot take down those walls. You can, if you want to adapt it internally, you need to check that wall can be taken out. It can be done. You may have to replace the windows for like windows. So for example, if you've got a beautiful original wood stained glass window in a property, the council will say, look, you can do the works to this property, but that window needs to be replaced like for like. Then you've got to find a company in the UK that can manufacture that, and you can imagine there's not going to be many of them around, and they're going to charge quite a bit. So what grade 1 and 2 is basically around the listing and protection of property with value and of a heritage, and with sort of that side of it. So I would always say, if you're considering going into this and you're new to property, personally, I would avoid a grade 1 or 2 on your first deal. I just think it's too much risk going into it. I remember years ago, I went and saw a site in London. A friend of mine was project managing a build for a very wealthy, I think, prince overseas somewhere. And it was in a really nice part of, I think it was Knightsbridge from memory, this build. And it was conversion of an existing terraced house into luxury apartments, like penthouse apartments, absolutely stunning. But it was a listed building. Okay. Now, from memory, I think there was some walls taken out in the basement that shouldn't have been. And obviously the project manager told the client that we can't take these walls out, And that client said, just do it anyway. And obviously didn't want to. So I think he left the site. I think someone else came in, but they did do it. That is a whole legal ramification. I mean, the council will absolutely come after you legally for it, and you'll probably have to pay a lot of money because you can't.
And they have money back.
Yeah. Well, I think it is still challenging for councils, but the problem with the likes of the Prince is they've probably got more money than they ever need. So they'll probably just say, "Fine, sue me. Give me a massive bill, and I'll pay it." But sadly, that building then has lost its appeal and its history. So yeah, that's what grade 1 and 2 is. So just be a bit careful when you first go into them.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good explanation. So how does it work with conservation area?
So conservation area is almost like a great, if you think about grade 1 and 2, that's individual properties that you need to consider there. Conservation area is almost like a street or a series of streets in a location that could have conservation order on it, which means that if you want to, again, almost like change like windows and doors or frontages, that they may need to apply to the conservation officer and get some feedback on that before you can do that. So if you're going for planning and it's in a conservation area, the conservation officer, because they call someone that works at the council an officer, they will need to assess that application, and they'll look at it from more of a design aesthetic as well. Now, how will this affect the conservation area? So it's more about developments in, say, maybe more rural locations or areas where there's sites and parks of historic merit. So again, you may be forced, or there might be requirements in the planning permission that you need to change windows, doors, or structures like for like. So it can still increase your build cost. I wouldn't say, don't be put off doing I think a scheme in a conservation area, but you just need to be aware to have the right conversations with your planning consultant and possibly even a meeting with the conservation officer, if need be, on site.
Okay. So sorry for that. It was just Emily that came.
Emily's coming in. She's like, I need some work doing.
Again. Yeah. Okay. Next question then. As an investor, which planning is the best?
As an investor, which planning is the best? Was this one of the questions you got asked from your community? As an investor, which planning is the best? I guess this question means around what type of strategy, possibly. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, or I guess, yeah, I think so. Or if they just mean permanent development.
Yeah, maybe then. Yeah, I mean, for me, from a risk point of view, if you're looking at a site, if a site's got potential to do something under permitted development, well, that's the best scenario you're going to be in. From that respect, one thing that is really lucrative right now is if you are still keen on the commercial space, is the changes that came in last year. So that's a really lucrative one where, so what happened in September of last year is that a shop, for example, or a bank or a business has a certain planning classification code. So it might be A1, A3, B1, but the government changed in September. So all of them have the same. They're all called E. So it means you could switch between one class to another. So if you've got a commercial unit and it's a shop today, someone else could still move into that premises and turn it into a different type of business under that classification. So I think that's quite a lucrative structure. Of course, with a commercial premises, the risks you've got to consider is the economy, because those businesses only really thrive if the economy is growing and thriving. So that is a consideration. But I would say permitted development is a massive thing because, rather than if you're looking for that small little flip, so many people are competing with smaller flips. Whereas if you could buy a building that you can convert under PD, permitted development, and you can maybe sell those or keep those, you've got probably, I would say, less people competing in the market, in my opinion. Maybe more sophisticated investors, but certainly less newbie investors going into that space.
Yeah, that's true. So we have come to the end. My friend. So last time I asked you some question, but this time I have switched it up a bit. So I took a question from I'm a really fan of Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
So I took a question from his book and podcast, and then I have one that I've actually usually asked the guest that I interview that I didn't ask you last time. So yeah, some new, some stolen. So I'm gonna go with the first one from Tim Ferriss. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
Oh, that's a good question from Tim Ferriss.
It
Like
is.
you, I'm a great fan of Tim Ferriss. He's a real, he really opens your mind in so many different ways. So recommend him to everyone. What are bad recommendations you hear in your area of expertise?
Yeah, or profession.
In my, in your profession. So, look, I mentor and coach a lot of people, and what do I hear in the industry that I still to this day hear a lot around obviously buying below market value is a massive thing, but what I hear, and I think it's a frustration of mine, is that people get sucked into sort of buying deals or looking for deals, and they need to get what I call every penny out. And this is one thing that really bugs me, because I often see it where someone's they're running numbers on deals every night. Let's say they're working a 9 to 5. Every night they're running numbers on deals, and they're struggling to find that deal that they want to do because they want to pull every penny out. Because it's hard to make that happen, especially if you're overseas, because you've got currency plays, you've got fluctuations in the currency market. That alone is a massive consideration when you're putting in 100, 200, 300,000, maybe a £500,000. So for me, that is a biggie, because then what happens is that individual who was so keen to go into property, each month that goes by that they can't secure that right deal, they lose hope, and I feel for them, because they need that support to get on the journey, because there are going to be knockbacks. There are always going to be offers being rejected. So they might be making multiple offers on deals, but getting rejected day after day and thinking, why am I being rejected? Why am I being ignored? Because either they're looking at the wrong type of deal that will allow you to potentially get more of your money out. Maybe you need to look at something a bit more bigger, that's got a bit more meat on the bone, because then you've got more potential to pull more or most of your money back out. To give you an example, there was one, I was having a chat with a builder contact on Friday for one in Oxford. So buy an existing dwelling, it would be a rental asset. So buy an existing dwelling, convert that into a HMO, and build a small block of apartments that you would then continue to rent out as well. That deal is almost all your money out, okay, in Oxford. So surreal, right? I don't think I'd ever get it, but almost. It isn't every penny out, though. I think for me, that's a biggie, because I think it creates, it means that people get frustrated and they lose hope on what they build on. That's a biggie for me. Okay,
that was a good answer. So this is my question. It's not from him, it's my question. So if you had unlimited funds, who would you have as a mentor?
Oh, crikey. If I had unlimited funds, who would I have as a mentor? Well, you, of course. So if I had unlimited funds, who would I have as a mentor?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I tell you what, I would love some time with Warren Buffett. If there was one man in the world, Warren Buffett, I think, would be the guy. That man is amazing. And I think he'd be someone I would truly love to have more time with. That's a really good question. I've never been asked that question before. Yeah, I think it would be Warren Buffett. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah, it would be Warren Buffett for me. I mean, you're probably a fan of Warren Buffett, I'm sure, as well. But
of course,
for me, absolutely him, hands down.
Okay. Then Imran, thank you for doing this part 2. It might be part 3. Who knows? We do one every year.
We'll do one every year. I'd love to. I mean, I think you were the first podcast I ever did. So I'm very grateful to come back for round 2. And if you have me, I'm sure I can come back in a year's time for round 3 and go 3 rounds. So thanks so much for some great questions. And